Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 of the ZF5 swap on my Bullnose Ford. Probably wondering what this is in my hand here. This is a manual steering column out of a 1989 Ford F-250. And what we're going to be doing is, well, we're getting rid of the auto column, you know, just so it looks better, it looks like factory. We're going to put in this 89 F-250 steering column. I was pretty sure they were 100% the same, but there's a slight difference in them. The difference is the ignition switch is a little bit different. I tried to put my 86 ignition switch on here, and it's slightly different, so we're just going to stick with the 89. And when I got the column, it didn't have a lock cylinder, or it didn't have the key for the lock cylinder, excuse me. And obviously you see that I have one in here now, and I'm going to show you how you can save a steering column without a key and put a new lock cylinder in it. The lock cylinders on these Fords is held in by this little pin right there. You can see that pin, and usually what you have to do to remove the lock cylinder, you have to have a key. What you do is you turn this into the on position, and you take a center punch and you push this pin down, and once that pin is down, it allows you to pull the lock cylinder out. Well, since you don't have the key and you can't turn it, what I ended up doing is this hole right there where that little pin is that holds the lock cylinder in, what you do is you take a drill bit that fits in there, that's just small enough where it's not rubbing on the sides right here, and what you do is you drill it out, and you keep drilling it until the pin is about completely gone. The best way to do this is you take the steering wheel off and you pull out this turn signal switch. That way you're not rubbing your side of your drill bit on your turn signal switch. And this is the cylinder that I took out. I'll show you the pin that I drilled out. You can see it right there. That is the pin that I drilled out, and I was able to remove this lock cylinder. And then to put the new cylinder in, you turn it into the on position. Then you stick your new lock cylinder in there, and then twist it into the lock position, and then you got a new lock cylinder in there, and then you got a column, that manual column with your new lock cylinder in it. It's best to have the turn signal switch removed to drill this out, and anyway, I wanted it out anyway because this is the new turn signal switch that I had in my 86. I believe that they're the exact same, and what ended up happening is it broke right here where these wires go. It's only a couple years old, and look at how wore out these pins are, and it broke, so I ended up putting the stock 89 one back in. If we end up having problems with it, we'll put in we'll buy a new one for it, but yeah, unfortunately this new one broke, a couple years old, and it already broke on me, so we put the original back in. And then your Bullnose steering wheel will go right on this with the nut and then tighten it up. So same thing, you look just like stock. The next thing you're going to want to do is we're going to put the steering column back in. So there's 5 of these little screws that go into the firewall, and then there is 2 of these that go up like this to hold the steering column up. And then be sure to hook up your electrical connections, the turn signal on, and then the one for the ignition switch. So let's get this column put back up where it needs to be. Something else I just found out while installing this column, I was trying to put it on and this aluminum piece was on here. Well, this one with the elongated holes, turns out this is only specific to the 87 through 91 Fords. So what I did is I unbolted this one, took the one off my auto column for the Bullnose 80 through 86. It bolts right up, so that's another thing that I found. There's just a few differences. I'm just learning as I go. I knew they would work, but there was a couple of differences that I just wanted you guys to know if you end up using a 87 through 91 brick nose Ford column. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the slip yoke back on to hook up the steering linkage. And you put the bolt through and then the nut, tighten it up. And then we're going to put this air intake back on that we took off. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the steering wheel on, put the nut on it, tighten it up, and then we're going to put on this switch panel right here. It's got the 86 steering wheel on it on the 89 column. Next thing we're going to do is remove the driveline. So there's 2 U-bolts right there. They're 1/2-inch end wrench. And then there's 2 off the transfer case right there. And then there's also 2 back there on the rear driveline. So let's remove the drivelines now. Now that you got the drivelines removed, you're going to unplug this speed sensor. And then there's a little clip on here that you pull up, and you can unhook the speedometer cable. And then after that, you can unhook the four-wheel drive shift indicator. There's a wire for it. And then there's 6 bolts around this whole transfer case that bolts to the transmission. We're going to unbolt that and remove the transfer case separate. And then make sure you unhook the shift linkage from the transmission. So now that you got the transfer case pulled, we pulled the 6 bolts and put a transmission jack under here and got all the linkage unhooked and wiring and jacked it up and pulled it out. And I guess on these AODs, you know, you got to have a bucket ready because for some reason fluid passes through this transmission and then goes to the transfer case. So there's a little weep hole there. Not sure why there's fluid coming out. Maybe that's just how these AODs are, but we got the transfer case out. It's sitting over here. This is the NP208 that it had, and I knew it wasn't that good a condition. And then I moved this here, and there's a little bit of slop. There's quite a bit of slop. Yeah, that's not good. I knew it wasn't that good, but yeah, it's definitely some slop in there. Next thing you're going to want to do once you got the transfer case removed is there's a bolt here, 1/2 inch, and there's also one right up there. We're going to remove the starter, and then you're going to take off that one right there that connects the power wire. The next thing I'm going to do, I got the starter removed, is I'm going to drain my transmission. This is optional. I'm just doing it so it doesn't make such a big mess on the floor. I have a drain plug in my transmission pan that I already put in, so I'm going to drain the fluid, and then we're going to go about unhooking the cooling lines that you see right there, the transmission cooler lines, and then how to remove them. So let's get it drained and then we'll start unhooking those. Well, now that you got the tranny lines unhooked from the transmission, the cooling lines, mine were a 1/2 inch end wrench. Depending on how tight they are, you might need to use a flare nut wrench if they're starting to strip off. The next thing we're going to do is remove the trans cooler. So we're going to remove the grill to get to the trans cooler. So there's a bunch of Phillips head screws. We're going to get the grill taken off. So my pickup, I'm not sure about your Ford, but it looks like it has 2 tranny coolers. So it has this one, and there's one in the radiator. So we're going to remove this one. I got these loosened up with a 1/2 inch wrench or a crow's foot or a flare nut. Disconnect these lines. You can hear it draining back. We'll let that drain so the fluid doesn't get all over the place. We're going to take these are 8 mils, start undoing these. We got that auxiliary trans cooler off. What we're going to do is there's a line here on the radiator and a line there on the radiator. It looks like they're both 1/2 inch wrench. We're going to take those off and then figure out how to get the lines out. I'm not sure how they'll come out because they're all connected together since it has that aux cooler, but I'll show you here in a minute. So now that you're under the vehicle, you got all those lines unhooked. There's one nut you have to take off. It's right there, and that holds that clip on that holds the cooling lines. And then you're going to do your best you can to fish them out. There's probably no exact way you can do it, just any way you can get them fished out. If it'll help, you can undo this hose clamp right here, take this line off. I believe these Fords, they're not all one piece, not the ones that I've seen. They very well could be, I'm not sure, but just do the best you can to try to get it fished out, and we'll undo that nut up there and try to get it fished out and see if we can do it one piece. Now after removing that nut and yeah, just about giving yourself a heart attack trying to get all the transmission cooler lines out, which is always a fun time because they're hard metal. And yeah, they like to cover about, you know, just about 100 square inches of the shop with just ATF that we like to have to clean up. So we're going to move on to the next thing and work through the ATF mess because messes are no bueno. And yeah, let's start getting that transmission pulled out of here. And if you couldn't tell, I put the grill back on after I got the trans cooler out and the line. So we're going to put that nut back on that held the bracket on for the trans cooler now, and then we'll get working. So now that you're under the vehicle again, we're going to start unhooking linkages. So we're going to unhook this here. This is for your automatic shifter, and this linkage right here, this cable is called the TV cable. These AOD transmissions is not electronic. They're shifted by throttle position. So this is a throttle cable off your throttle body, and we're just going to pop that off, and then we're going to start removing this linkage for the automatic that we're no longer going to need. I think there's 2 nuts right there. You take those off, it'll remove this, and then you take this nut off here. It'll take all of this old automatic linkage off that we're not going to be using anymore for the 5-speed. The more crap we can take off, the better, so less stuff to worry about in the way. So that one linkage I was talking about, you take a 5/8 ratchet and then a wrench on top. So there's a bolt and a nut, and then you loosen that, and that removes this big piece of linkage here, 2 5/8, and then what removes this is a 1/2-inch bolt, this piece, and then there's a bolt that also goes in the side of this transmission that holds on this TV cable, and there's a little like self-tapping screw you undo, and that'll remove this bracket from this transmission vent tube. So we're going to take that off, and then I'll take you up top and show you how to disconnect the TV cable. What we're going to do now is remove the TV cable. So there's this plastic piece right here on top of the throttle body. There's 1 screw there and 1 screw there. So all you need to do is remove 1 screw from right here. You can flip this up like this, and so this one right here is your TV cable. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this plastic piece right here and pull back on it, and then not unclip the TV cable. And then there's this black plastic piece right here in this bracket, and there's 2 little, I would call them maybe like a wing, that go like this to hold it into that metal. So what you do is you squeeze those together, and then you push the TV cable out like that. Then what you can do is you can go underneath and remove the cable. I think when I let go, it's going to fall. So then we'll come out underneath, and then we'll pull the TV cable out, and we're not going to need that anymore since our manual transmission obviously doesn't need that shift cable anymore. So now that we're back under the vehicle, the next thing we're going to do is, you see that nut right there on the flex plate. So those are the torque converter bolts. Usually right here there would be an inspection cover, 2 bolts, or excuse me, 4 bolts hold it on. And anyway, mine used to have it on here, and I found out it fell off about a year ago. So what you do is you take that off, and you get in here, and there's 4 torque converter nuts, all at 90-degree increments. So what you do is you take the nut off each one, and then you can do what I do, or if you have a bigger engine than what I have a 302, and I'm able to just grab the belts and turn the engine over after every time I take one nut off. So what you do is you take a nut off, turn the engine over, take a nut off, turn the engine over, and you repeat that 4 times. And if you can't do it by turning the belts, you could put a breaker bar in a socket on the crank pulley on the engine and pull it over. And if you do turn it over with the belts like I've been doing, just be careful. Don't pinch your hands in the pulleys. Keep your hands away from the pulleys. Just grab the belts and turn it over. And make sure your hands aren't oily when you grab the belts, because your hands will slip or you're going to make the belt slip. The whole reason for having to take a nut off and turn the engine over is because you can't get to all of them at once. You might be able to get 2 of them at once if you get one lined up through the starter hole, but that's why you turn the engine over, is because you can't get them all at once. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to get under the vehicle, and these top bolts here, this is a 15 mil. The heads of these bolts are all 15 mil. These nuts here are 18 mils. So there's 2 up there, there's 2 right here, there's a single 18 mil right there, there's 2 18 mils right there, and then the same on this side is on that side, the exact same thing. So to get to these top ones, what I actually use a 3/4 inch socket with an extension on the impact, and it's impact swivel, so it helps you get up there. So we're going to undo those, get those unbolted, and then we're going to work on getting the bell housing bolts out. I'm going to try to do it without pulling the exhaust off. I don't really want to do that. This is aftermarket exhaust. I don't know if your stock exhaust, yeah, if you even still had that on one of these pickups, if you have to pull it or not, but I've got dual, so hopefully we don't have to do it, but we will find out here. So now that you got all your bolts off your cross member, you fish them gussets out, and what might help you if you don't want to try to do it without taking the exhaust off. So what you can do is you can loosen them out, and then you can push these pipes up and down and move them around and get that gusset out. I got the nuts off of this mount, and it'll make it easier since these studs stick down so far, where you can do, instead of having to jack the tranny super far up to get it to clear before you pull the cross member, you can unbolt the transmission mount itself and get it out of there. And then that way you don't have to jack the tranny up so far and have it hitting your cab to get it to clear this cross member, so you can get it slid out of the frame, so you can get your transmission jack under there and get the transmission pulled back and yanked out of the vehicle. You can unplug your neutral safety and get it unhooked. And then there are 6 bell housing bolts. So there's 2, 4, 6. 6 bell housing bolts, I believe. And the top 2 you can see right there, we're going to get from inside the cab. We're going to use our electric ratchet, some extensions, and a universal with a 5/8 socket. So let's get all of those bolts removed except for one of them. Leave one of them in there so the tranny doesn't try falling out before you got the jack under there and ready to get it yanked out. So the transmission dipstick is held in with one of the bell housing bolts on the passenger side, second from the bottom. So once that's out, we're going to get up in here in the engine, try to get up in the engine bay. We're going to grab the dipstick tube, kind of wiggle it, attempt to pull it out. Might be a little bit lodged in there. There we go. Take that old dipstick out. That's the last time our engine bay is going to have a dipstick in it for the transmission. A final note, before we pulled the tranny, we put a jack under the oil pan with a piece of wood on it. You want to support the engine that way that the input shaft on the tranny is not in a bind and you're supporting the engine. You use a piece of wood so you're not denting the oil pan in. So yeah. So we got the old trans jack under, and we had to put some pieces of wood on it because the pan that this AOD has a big divot in the bottom of it, and it doesn't sit level on the transmission jack. But anyway, we got it jacked up, we got the cross member taken out and lowered it down, and we really made a mess on the floor because the damn torque converter decided that it was going to stay on the flywheel, or the flex plate, excuse me, rather than go with the transmission input shaft. So yeah, it spewed oil the whole time, but yeah, at least we got this greasy thing out of there. I got that clean ZF to put in. This thing's nasty, but still works good. So next episode, we'll get the old flex plate off, get the flywheel put on and the clutch, and we'll get the old ZF thrown in there. Thanks, guys.